He was supposed to be WCW's answer to Hulk Hogan. He was the total package. Flexi Lexi himself, Lex Luger. A man that started in Florida and then quickly was gobbled up by Jim Crockett Promotions, and they absolutely just looked at him and said, oh man, look at that body. Look at that body. Sexy, and he knows it. Bet you didn't expect that reference, did you guys? Now that song's stuck in your head. You're fucking welcome. But, that being said, Lex Luger needed time to develop because, well, he was still green as goose shit, as some may say. So he was put in the Horseman, quickly became a fan favorite, was always better as a heel, and then had a stint in the World Wrestling Federation, came back to WCW in such shocking fashion on the first Nitro, and really had a pretty interesting run for the second time in WCW. But as for how he did on the big shows. And I'm not talking about the Giant, though I'll get to him. I'm talking about WCW NWA Starrcade, the flagship, the granddaddy of them all, their WrestleMania that happened before WrestleMania was ever a gleam in Vince McMahon's thigh. You're welcome for that. Lex Luger was a big part of some monumental moments in Starrcade history. So I'm here to talk about those. I'm John Rentham with my real honest thoughts on Lex Luger's Starrcade legacy. So I just did one on Sting, then decided to do one on Lex. I don't think I'm going to do any more. Because yes, I could talk about Dusty's legacy, but really I talked about that in the Flair one. I did one on Flair, did one on Sting, did one on Luger. I'm trying to think of other wrestlers that have been at numerous, part of numerous Starrcade events. I found, that Scott Steiner he wasn't part of enough, big moments to where I felt that it was necessary to talk about that. I don't know. If you're interested in the Scott Steiner Starrcade Legacy one, let me know. But yes, Lex Luger, who I admit, having never really been a fan of for a variety of reasons, I stand by everything that I feel, but he did grow into being one hell of a performer. He got better. U.S. Championship reigns. He had a super long U.S. Championship reign, actually the longest in NWA WCW history. 523 days, I believe. Monumental. And even had some World Championship sniffs that I'll talk about here in this. But realistically, if you take a look at what he did from 97 on, it's weirdly impressive how they kind of just went all, kind of lazy on this. Now, that's not to say, by the way, the time we got to 98, especially 99, that Lex wasn't clearly juiced up to the goddamn tits and clearly wasn't having his personal issues, such as helping, push Miss Elizabeth over the edge even though she was an adult. Lex Luger still had some great moments, so let's start at the beginning, as we should. Florida Championship Wrestling. Eddie Graham had passed away Super Bowl Sunday 85, so he got into wrestling after flaming out in the USFL, which the USFL itself flamed out. Thanks in large part to some bad business dealings, especially by one of the owners. Gee, I wonder if you can guess which one that is. Give you a hint. It's the fucking current president of the United States that some of you dipshits voted for. Again, morons. Off my soapbox. He's in Florida. Well, both. Lex is in Florida. And was part of some of those Battle of the Belt events, which were big deals. But obviously, Florida, it was starting to get swallowed up anyway. Even if Eddie Graham hadn't passed away, it was going to become very much and even more constricted regional territory. And Crockett bought Florida, even though he probably didn't need to. I don't know how much he bought it for. Pennies on the dollar, I hope. Because it wasn't worth anything. That being said, when Lex Luger was brought into World Championship Wrestling, yes, you could look at the guy. And the guy looked impressive. He did. He looked great in 8x10. And being put in the Horseman, it was a hell of a goddamn rub for him. They rubbed the total package. You're welcome for that image. They kept rubbing him until he tried to take out the shirt, but the shirt was too tight, Billy. Nobody is going to get that unless you know, deep cuts of, meme territory, as it were. But, competing for the U.S. title, he faced off against Dusty Rhodes. in a steel cage match at Starrcade 87. Ill-fated Starrcade 87 that I talked about in the Sting video. I'm not going to, chew my food twice, but Vince McMahon basically fucked with him. It was ridiculous. It was a pretty damn good match, though. Really good cage match. Dusty would win the U.S. title, and part of the reason they did that is because they were priming Luger for bigger and better things. So it was a pretty good match. Dusty was able to lead Luger, and Luger has definitely had better luck in this cage match than he had in the one against Bruiser Brody, where Bruiser just stopped selling, or Brody just stopped selling, and he said, oh, fuck, I need to go. And I mean, I don't think he was going to hurt Luger. Luger wouldn't have been able to do shit if he wanted to. But, man, it really took guts to face Brody like that. And then Brody took his guts elsewhere, to Puerto Rico. I'm sorry. Carlos Colon and Jose Gonzalez should be arrested and put in jail for that. But the match with Dusty was pretty goddamn good. And then we go to the following, summer, actually, because he was being primed to be the next heir apparent, the world champion, after Flair. They didn't pull the trigger at Great American Bash 88. You could argue they should have. Maybe they should have. Because even though they had the blood stoppage thing, which didn't really work all that well, but Great American Bash 88 was great. Now, once it was proven that there was blood stoppage, the crowd started chanting bullshit. You don't want to piss off the Baltimore crowd. But he would continue to have matches against Flair. He would have a world title rematch at Starrcade 88, Norfolk Scope. First Starrcade off of Thanksgiving. And it was a great match, a great 30-minute match. They wrestled well. Luger was there for everything. This wouldn't be the last match they would have, but they would do some pretty damn good stuff. And Luger was still there for everything. He was still a babyface. And then would defeat Barry Windham for the U.S. Championship at... I apologize, by the way, if I sound a little bit rough. Unfortunately, I'm still dealing with some rib pain, which has kind of caused me some problems. But I'm so energized, I want to talk about this stuff. So, in 89, he does beat Barry Windham at Chi-Town Rumble for the U.S. title. Then he loses it to Michael Hayes, of all people, doing one of the worst DDT spots I've ever seen. Michael Hayes tries to go back, and Luger falls the other direction. It is one of the most... Look up Luger DDT spot Wrestle War 89. Just Google Luger DDT Wrestle War 89. You will likely get some GIFs or some short clips, and you will be amazed. I'm amazed. I still cannot fathom how it happened. My God. They were paying him how much and he was doing that? So anyway, he was U.S. champion, but then turned heel against Ricky Steamboat. We went to the Great American Bash 89. I believe he turned at the Clash. And was still U.S. champion. Because he'd won it back from Hayes like 2 weeks later. Something like that. He held it for a few months. And this was going to be the long reign. Because he would end up holding it from end of May 89 until... well, he'd hold it for a while. He faced off against Sting, Muta, and Flair in the Future Shock Iron Man tournament that I talked about in the Sting one. I did a retrospective on Starrcade 89. I remember liking it a whole lot more the first time. Like, Starrcade 89 really isn't that great because it was a Jim Herd idea, but some good in-ring action. And Luger did not end up winning, it was a weird point system. But he was still U.S. champion. And then Sting suffers the injury at the Clash just before Wrestle War 90. So they decide, shit, let's turn Luger face. He turns face in the name of Sting, to win for the Borden man in the name of Sting. Can I do you two? No. No, I can't. But that was a cage match of some... Was it a cage match? Was it a cage match, or am I thinking of Capital Combat? No, Capital Combat was a cage match. But I remember he had this... he had... It was like goofy finish where they really probably should have put the title on Luger because it kind of killed him even though he's a U.S. champion. But Flair had promised it to Sting. They were going to hold off on that, and Sting was miraculously able to come back in time for the Great American Bash 1990. Of course, we had to go to Capital Combat with the the RoboCop appearance. JR having to sell RoboCop. I hope JR gets through all kinds of rehab and everything and recovers 100%, by the way, as he's currently going through the after effects of colon cancer treatment. But he would end up still being the U.S. champion. He would then kind of float around a little bit. He would lose the U.S. title to Stan Hansen at Halloween Havoc 90 with the weird red carpet. I will never understand that look of that particular event. That being said, he would then win the title back in a Texas Lariat match, beating Stan Hansen at Starrcade 90. And then would hold it until the Great American Bash 91, where we want Flair, we want Flair, we want Flair. Flair would leave. Jim Herd fired him, and he took his talents to New York. And Jim Herd was left there with his egg on his face, or his face on egg, however you want to go with it. Luger would become the world champion, defeating Barry Windham, turning heel, lining with Harley Race. They had Mr. Hughes there. Yeah, they had Mr. Hughes there. One thing you can say about Mr. Hughes, he certainly was at wrestling events. And he certainly was part of wrestling companies. He just wasn't very fucking good. But, then we had the Queeful Lottery thing that Sting was part of, teamed with Abdullah. Luger teamed with Arn, who was a heel at this point, past association with the Horsemen. They took on Terrence Taylor, who, yes, was Terry Taylor, as part of, I believe, the York Foundation at this point, and the Z-Man, Tom Zink. They thought Tom Zink should have been part of this pay-per-view event. Why? He looked good in an 8x10, and he was bland as fuck. But anyway, Luger would then, compete in the Queeful Lottery Battle Bowl, and would face off against Sting. I believe Sting would be attacked by Rick Rude just before, or after Rude got eliminated, got hit with the Rude Awakening. Luger's like, oh, I could just get Sting, and then Sting eventually tosses him out. That would lead to Super Brawl 2. Where Sting would beat Luger, a very unmotivated Luger, I do want to say. Apparently he might have had a staph infection. I think the infection was just, whatever poison he felt from his WCW contract. He then got signed to a World Bodybuilding Federation contract by Vince, because I think his contract still had a little bit of time on it. I don't remember if it was up in the summer or... it was up sometime in 92, I believe. And then he debuted under the World Bodybuilding Federation label at WrestleMania 8, but then would suffer the motorcycle accident where he get the plate in his arm, that kind of stuff. Would debut as a narcissist, because Bobby Heenan couldn't say that word for some reason, but narcissist. But he would debut, in front of the mirror and everything, accentuating the fact that he was in love with himself. And we would do the WWF run, where they turned him to Mr. USA, didn't put the title on him at SummerSlam 93, feud with Ludwig Borga and killed him. And then he would jump back after competing on a series of house shows for the WWF just after SummerSlam 95. Show up on the first Nitro in the Mall of America. Big deal. He felt like a big get for them. He was offered a lot less money by Bischoff, but he did eventually earn trust and everything. And you kind of can't blame Bischoff for thinking that, because Bischoff saw him as not a turncoat, but just kind of a jerk. Just getting these notes ready here. And then he would be part of the ill-fated, Yeti appearance where Luger attacked Savage at Halloween Havoc. We get Starrcade 95. Talk about this in the Sting, piece. Some overlapping here, I do apologize. Sting and Flair and Luger in a triangle match at Starrcade 95 after the two wrestling companies won Cup tournament. The WCW won, by the way. Savage versus Tenzon happened on that show, and it sounds a lot more interesting than it actually plays out. So, Flair would win. Luger wouldn't. Luger and Sting would have the uneasy alliance. Luger would be part of the hostile takeover match. Will lose his trust in Sting at Fall Brawl 96 in the lead-up, because Sting attacked him as actually Jeff Farmer. Luger would then start more of a grassroots, build and everything. People were really starting to get behind him. He would face up against the Giant at Starrcade 96. That was a big deal. And then through 97, he would team with the Giant after the Giant left the NWO because they couldn't figure out what the fuck to do with the Giant. And then he would team with the Giant against Hogan and Rodman at Bash at the Beach 97, where Rodman would do an arm drag to Luger and not take his sunglasses off. Pretty cool move. Big pop, by the way. And then he would continue to rise up, and then they decided the Palace of Auburn Hills, in the same venue where Luger failed to win the title from Yokozuna, Hogan decided to put Luger over for no reason. Now, it was a big moment. Excuse me, apologies. It was a big moment, but the problem is, it also kind of nerfed Sting winning the title, because Hogan would have held it from Hog Wild 96, nicknamed Road Wild a year later, all the way through. But it was a big moment for Luger. He won the title for all of 5 days, dropped it back, and a really not very good match. And then would continue to do what he did in 97, but then would face up against Buff Bagwell at Starrcade 97, and they matched to win 16 minutes and 36 seconds. It felt twice that long. Buff Bagwell in a singles match for that long, there is something seriously wrong with Eric Bischoff, as evident by the finish of Sting and Hogan. But Luger would continue to do well, face up against Savage, I believe, at Sold Out 98. Would join the NW Wolfpack. Stuff would kind of go awry. He'd start missing some pay-per-views. He would, I think he was part of Fall Brawl 98. And then, if I recall correctly, he was making infrequent TV appearances. And then a lot of people would end up missing Starrcade 98. Sting missed it because he was in rehab. Luger missed it. Bret Hart missed it for whatever reason. And then basically, a lot of this... I'm just going to finish these up quickly because I'm getting tired. I do apologize. He would turn heel. He would become the total package. Lex Luger would die, but he would become the total package. He faced Sting at Starrcade 99. And yeah. A match where basically Sting was made to look like an idiot again. Luger took him out afterwards, breaking his hand, but then Sting would come back soon after. And then by the time we got to Starrcade 2000, the wheels were off the goddamn bus. It was going round and round all the way down the cliff. And he faced off against Bill Goldberg. If Bill Goldberg did not beat Luger, then Bill Goldberg would have had to have retired. They kept that new undefeated streak thing going even after Russo left, when they could have just nullified it. But then again, Bill Goldberg was out after WCW Sin because he needed shoulder surgery, and by the time Bill Goldberg was ready to come back, WCW was done, so Bill Goldberg got paid about 18 months to 2 years to sit at home. He can make international appearances, but nothing in the U.S., so Bill Goldberg got paid a lot of money. Lex Luger then would go into a spiral, oh, you poor thing, and now seems to be happier and healthier and whatever, and was inducted in the Hall of Fame. So yeah, there you go. There's his legacy. What do you think of his legacy? What do you think his best match is? His best match, obviously, or arguably, was against Flair at Starrcade 88. The one against the Giant actually wasn't too bad. And the one against Flair and Sting at 95 would have been fine if it would have been about 10 minutes shorter. But that being said, agree, disagree with what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Ritland, and until we meet again, happy trails to you.